Today's reading comes from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Ananda. Abiding in God. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Yogananda often emphasized, more often to his disciples than to the general public, but also to everyone generally, for it was a universal teaching, the importance of attunement. For divine understanding cannot be created, it must be perceived. To the disciples, Yogananda spoke of the importance of attunement with the Guru. To others, he urged the importance, at least of attuning oneself to higher consciousness. Can an eagle rise without support from the sustaining air? Jesus Christ said in the Gospel of St. John, chapter 15, I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, the same bringeth forth much fruit. For without me ye can do nothing. If a man abide not in me, he is cast forth as a branch, and is withered. And men gather them, and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. If ye abide in me, and my words abide in you, ye shall ask what ye will, and it shall be done unto you. Herein is my Father glorified, that ye bear much fruit, so shall ye be my disciples. How can we abide in him, Jesus says, if my words abide in you? By words he meant not only his spoken words, but his vibrations, his consciousness, of which the words are only an expression. We must abide by the teachings, but we must also absorb those teachings into ourselves, that they become our own experience. For disciples on this path, the more in their hearts they live consciously in the presence of the Masters, the more they will find the divine presence living within them. And for all truth seekers, whether disciples or not, the more they live sustained inwardly by the awareness of God's presence, the higher they will find themselves soaring in wisdom and joy. For the Bhagavad Gita says in the 10th chapter, I am the source of everything. From me all creation emerges. Blessed with this realization, the wise, awe-stricken, adore me. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
From Whispers from Eternity by Paramahansa Yogananda, a book of prayer demands. Demand for the removal of the veil of illusion. Veils surround me, Father, hiding thee from me. I love the dainty colored veils of roses and daisies, the shining veils of clouds of burning gold, the dark star-decked shawl of the night. But how long wilt thou remain hidden behind all these veils? I love them because they hint at thy presence, yet still they hide thee. I long to see thee as thou art, behind all this cover of veils. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back. Back home, my name is Raghu. Karen and I are leading the service today. You learn a lot on 2-week trips, especially when you're driving 1,600 miles. You've got a driving seclusion from California to Dallas. And that, what I just read from Whispers, everything in this world is a veil. And it's an illusion. It's not that we have to back away and retreat to the mountains. You can, but you don't have to, because the real cave is in our hearts. But we have to get into the cave of our hearts in order to experience the inner silence. And the inner silence is what pierces through the veils. I was saying during the morning meditation an hour ago that many people define themselves like they're in a shoebox, that this is my world and this is what I do. And we're not shoeboxes. We're the infinite consciousness, although it's hard at times to see that or to feel that or to experience that. But we have the potential to experience that. So whatever job that I do, whatever jobs that you do, you're not defined by your job. That infinite consciousness is constantly flowing through, no matter where you are. But sometimes, even in the job that I have, I can forget that. And all of a sudden I become my job. My mind wants me to be that form. And everything, and we've talked a lot about this recently here, but everything is a flow of consciousness. When I landed in California, in my mind, and on my gigantic post-it, I knew exactly what I wanted to do when I landed. And everything worked fine up until I realized that a big chunk of what I wanted to do wasn't going to happen when I wanted it to happen, because I had it listed. Do this first and do this second. So the first thing was fine. It was very easy to get a rent-a-car. The second thing was not so fine. There were some delays. But my response was, initially, was to all of a sudden feel tension over the fact that my plan that I had all laid out in my mind wasn't happening, and it couldn't happen for another day and a half. So instead of going against, the flow, I decided, well, then accept what just happened and realize that there were no mistakes involved. It was just shifted, so my little game plan in my mind didn't happen. So I got into a flow, and I went with the flow of what was trying to happen. And that flow is what I needed to do instead of the game plan. I didn't really know that at the time. But it's easy to get locked in to this is the way it should be. This is what I do for a living. This is my job. And that's all true. We work. We have to work. It's good to work. It's good to participate. But behind all the veil, that veil is this vibration that's constantly trying for us to tune into the vibration and let it just flow through you. There is a constant channel, and there's a freedom to it that you begin to feel. And it's not an overnight success type of thing. It takes work. When I told my mother and father that how much I liked living in California, and this was years ago, in Ananda community in the Sierra foothills, and explaining that to my mom and dad, my mom said, "Oh, it must be so nice to live in Shangri-La." But then I had to make a point that this is not easy. This is very hard to do, because even though you're living in Shangri-La, beautiful country, and it's all great, it isn't just going to magically happen that all of a sudden you're going to start to feel this bliss. Doesn't just drop on your plate. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of perseverance. And it's not easy battling against yourself. Very difficult. It's very difficult to battle against Raghu. Personality is, this is the way I am and this is what I do. But it takes time to realize that's not true. Raghu is just simply a personality. Yoga, Kriyananda used to say that I'm just an event. I'm not really Kriyananda. I got the name Kriyananda, Swami Kriyananda, founder of Ananda, writing tons of books, directed by his guru, Yogananda, to do certain things in life that he did. But Kriyananda in his later age just said, I don't really know who Kriyananda is. Yoganandaji, Paramahansa Yogananda said, I killed Yogananda long ago. What does all that mean? It means that all of us are a flow. We're an event that's happening through each of us. And that event needs to engage. It needs to let the energy just go as it is, but not to be defined as that I am this and I am that. Yeah, I'm a male, but I've got a lot of female qualities. And you're a female and you have a lot of male qualities. It's a blending. It's a blending of everything, how we live, how we act, and what we do in life. One of the longer readings in this topic today, Kriyananda wrote from the Bible, as Jesus said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. You see, it's a blending of everything, because it's just not doing good works that's going to get you there. It's just not being baptized. It's just not being Zazen Buddhist. It's not just being a yogi. It's being everything. We're everything that we can possibly be. But words alone won't get you there. It is very good to study. It is very good to read. It is very good to interact with people. But it doesn't end there. The flow of consciousness is constantly happening through not just us, but everybody out there. Along the way, I stopped in Las Vegas. I have a brother who lives there. And I've been, I've said this maybe to some of you, but maybe not all of you. I think I've spent most of my decades trying to avoid my brother. And we grew up together, but we're on different wavelengths. So my learning curve was to accept him for who he was. And why not just give him love? Why avoid him? So I had the opportunity to stop in Vegas. Now, Las Vegas is a very interesting town. It's it's all at night. I'm not sure where they get all their electricity from. Probably get it from the Hoover Dam. But it's just incredible to see it. There's no nighttime. It's like everything is lit up with huge screens, and everything is a sense to draw your senses into Barry Manilow or Blue Man Group, or we're going to see Cirque du Soleil, or everything is to pull you out into the senses. It's all about senses. Now the other side of it is, even though it's a city that is actually kind of growing and booming, it's a very different city when you see the struggling people on the streets. There are so many people. I've seen a lot of people in Sacramento on the streets. You see them here in Dallas. You see them in any city. But in Las Vegas, there was a real hardship for me to see the number of families that would be sitting underneath bridges. And we're not talking one bridge. And it hurts. You have a real pain in your heart. And I felt like going over to these folks and just saying, you can do this because you have the potential in yourself to get off your feet. And I just couldn't do it to everybody. I wanted to just say, come with me. We can do this together. But it wasn't as if, there was just so many people. So you've got the glitz and you've got the super high end in this city. And then you have a super other end. There is basically very little in the middle. So it's all of this with a middle, a little bit of a middle, and then a lot on the street. So your heart immediately goes out. But to define whether it's glitz or whether it's homeless or whether it's struggling, the mind wants to go and just label this person in their super long Humvee with a swimming pool in the back end of it, my God, to somebody with a family and babies. It's just on the street corner or underneath bridges. So how does it get around all of that? Everything is a flow. And these families and these high rollers and the other ends are in the flow. So if I had thought, I would have done like Eric and Shakti do. They pass out food to people on the street, and that's a beautiful way to do it. And when you see them at the red light. And I just didn't have any food in the glove compartment to give them. So all I could give them was an Om vibration, an Om consciousness, and then a few bucks here and there for those who came up when I was parked next to somebody who's standing right next to me. So many people turn the other way when there's someone standing right there. I mean, if they're there because it's part of your flow. And this is an opportunity to do something, to give something back. Now, Jesus lived in very difficult times. It doesn't take, if you ever see a program, it might be called Rome or whatever it was called, it was out for 2 years, you really get a sense of what Rome was like. I mean, a brutal, brutal time. And also, maybe not so different than what we see nowadays, but Rome and Jesus incarnated in an annex part. I mean, Jerusalem was part of the Roman kingdom and empire. But Jesus was from Nazareth. Jesus, though, realized the potential early on in his life that it was consciousness that was coming through him. And he came to bring not just the law. It wasn't about the law of Moses. It was about, now it's time for love. And in doing so, he had to go through horrific trials and tests to be able to offer this to people and put it in, because it needed to be registered not just in the Holy Land, Jerusalem or Nazareth, or it needed to be registered in the ether for the globe, for the world. You know, Buddha, I love Buddha, and I have friends who are Buddhist, but I never was attracted to Buddhism, but I'm attracted to Buddha. Now, Buddha came at a time when everybody would go around the fire, like we have the fire ceremony, and the Brahmins would offer for the support of those who wanted the offering, please bring me a wife, or please bring me a husband, or please, they wanted to offer to the gods for their success with God. So Buddha came and incarnated and redirected that. And he said, no, it's about you making the effort. And that's what Buddha did. He made the individual effort to go deep and connect with spirit. And he did. And he lived his life accordingly. But what happened, and this is what always happens in the great cycles of time, is that it gets misdirected, misunderstood by his disciples. So even though Buddha was deeply devoted to God, but because he didn't mention God too much, or the divine too much, his disciples said there was no God. And that went too far out. So who incarnates then? Is Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya incarnates and says, no, it is about a divine consciousness. It's not, you are connected to a divine consciousness. It is about whatever you call God. So this divine consciousness needs to be reinstated to people, that when they do practice on their own and meditate, that they are connecting. It is not just blank. It is not just about nirvana. It is beyond that. It is a divine link that you're meditating for. But then people got too far out with that, saying that there was no source, there was no imagery, they got too far out in the sense that Chaitanya incarnates and says, no, God does have form, whether it's Divine Mother or the Heavenly Father. For Chaitanya, it was Krishna. But God is not just blue and plays a flute. He is much more than that. But people could focus in on an image if they felt to and wanted to. So every time there's a redirection of the flow. And that flow now is for all of us to participate as we are in the cities that we live in, but to remind ourselves that even though there's a lot of concrete and asphalt out there and strip malls and whatever we do, there's a flow that is always happening. And it's a good reminder throughout the day to think of yourself as much more than what you do in life. It's much, much more than that. But it's hard. You know, one of Yogananda's disciples, Sister Gyanamata, said, your spirituality is tested in the cold light of day. Now that's something to remember. That cold light of day is what we do. It's what we do. We go out and work. That's what we do for a day. But we have to remember that we forget that the flow is there. It's not just about going home and meditating or going out to the park. Meditation happens all the time. You can bring it into your cave of your heart at any moment. You can take a few breaths at any part of the day, no matter what you're doing. The mind wants you to forget about that, but we have control over the mind. It's not the mind that rules the kingdom, it's the soul. That's our souls that is paramount in the kingdom, and the soul knows the answer. And that answer is to tune in as much as you can to the cave of your heart. I had friends with little tricks that they could remind themselves throughout the day how to tune in. When the Casio watches came out years ago, many years ago, all of a sudden, no matter where I was working, I would hear beep, 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 but it was beep, beep, beeping them to tell them, take a minute and think about the divine. Very good idea. I had a friend who taped up a little picture of Yogananda, the point between the eyebrows. Now, he didn't go to work that way, but he was in community. He would walk around. So every time you'd see this guy, you'd see Yogananda. It was a great reminder for me, this little teeny picture of Yogananda. Some people would put quarters in their shoes. So every time they slipped their shoes on, they would feel that, and they would think, oh, that's right, and take a moment, think about God. But the more we can practice that, the more we can just instill it no matter what we do, it becomes a habit. It becomes a very good habit. So it's a constant good habit that's flowing. I started driving in California, and next thing I know, I'm in Ananda village, which is a beautiful place to be. Everybody there, it's great. 8 hours later, I'm in Las Vegas. I mean, there's a big difference between Vegas and Ananda village, consciousness-wise. But it didn't change me. I was still in a good bhav. Had a good connection with my brother. It was hard at times to see as many people as I saw on the street, and that's difficult. But I wasn't going to get trapped by that difficulty. I wasn't going to stop my energy from flowing. And it very easily could have. I could have shrunk back into myself or drilled into myself and feel the pain and feel the hurt and see what I'm seeing out on the street in this town. But instead, I just had to pull it up and say, wait a minute. This is what this world's all about. Whether it's Vegas or Budapest or Istanbul or Kashmir, no matter where you are, you're going to see things, experience things that are going to be hard to accept when you're right in front of it. But that flow is flowing through them, it's flowing through us, it's flowing through everybody. So instead of drilling into myself and feeling that sadness, it's oming them. I'm saying, Jai Ma, bless these people. Because deep down, those folks that I saw, the high rollers, and their long Humvee, and the ones with nothing, the destitute people, they're all on their journeys. They're all flowing. And that is what you have to remember. We don't have to control things to make them work out for us. We have to just flow with things, and then everything will work out for us. But we have to take time to get inside. We have to go inside. It can't just happen by reading. I could read all the great scriptures around the world, but it's not going to get me there. You have to take time to get inside, and that time can be a minute. It also can be 30 minutes. It also can be 45, 90. It can be a long time. That's why in brief meditations that we do before service, that's why we say go deep as fast as you can, because it's the quality of depth that's important. Sometimes the minutes tick off and you think you're doing great, but the next thing you know, you could be in La La Land, fantasizing about meditation and instead of really deeply meditating. So take a moment, even after today, after you leave today, to get into the flow of what your day is going to be and flow with it. Don't try to orchestrate it. Now, there are schedules. It is good. You have responsibilities to be someplace at a certain time. Yeah, you have to do that. But at the same time, when you're in that structure, it's not who you are. The structure, it doesn't dictate who you are. It's the flow when you're in that form or that structure or that workplace, whatever it might be. And even though you might be around a lot of people that you might work with, there might be a lot of good people, and there might be some very interesting people you work with. They're all in their flow, as you are. There's just a beautiful sense that when you can wrap your mind around it, the mind will fall into line eventually. It's not always going to just misbehave. The soul's going to perk up and say, I'm actually working with you, my friend, and we can work together. Because we started with a very, very big ego when we begin the journey. And then that ego begins to shrink. That ego is the body identified, the soul identified with the body, where the soul, in reality, is identified with spirit. So, however your day leads you, however your week leads you, stay with the flow. Krishna said it too in the reading here today, that it is by going within, going into the true source, the wealth. You know, when you hike up in the mountains of the Sierras and you're trying to track the source of the American River or the Truckee River or any state that has a beautiful, beautiful river to it, where is the source? The source is always high, high up in the mountain. And that source is usually very, very teeny until it comes down and instead broads out into the great river. Well, that's what we're trying to do. We find the source of our existence inside of ourselves. And that source can be just a spark of light registered in your heart chakra. And that's where we go to meditate, into the cave of our hearts. And that's where we find the source. And when we lock into the source, then we flow like the mighty rivers out into this world. God bless.